Hello, and welcome to episode 41 of Expertise is Overrated, the podcast that takes the time to answer the questions you didn't know you didn't want the answer to. I'm Sean.
And I'm Vib, and neither of us has any clue what we're talking about. Now, before we move on, let's award the much vaunted Expertise is Overrated Tinfoil Award.
As a reminder, this is an award that we give out at the start of each episode to the person who had the most ridiculous point in last week's episode.
We've done it again.
We really need to remember who we are, what we set out to do, our own limitations, really, more than anything else, whenever we sit down to do one of these.
Yeah, but for a brief moment last time, I genuinely thought we had cracked it.
We did live in the light for a second, didn't we?
Yeah, but we did actually shockingly fail to answer the question.
Really bad.
As is the norm for us, really.
We might need to change our intro, you know. Our intro
where we failed to answer the questions.
The podcast
the answers to.
takes the time to answer the questions you didn't know you didn't want the answers to. I don't think we've answered a question yet.
Oh, we've answered many questions. It's just never the ones we asked.
Fair. So, I think that almost goes without saying that we're receiving the tinfoil for last week's episode.
Yeah. I feel we haven't shared a hat for some time.
No, it's not. We need to start. If we're going to be sharing these hats, we need to make them bigger because there's not room for your giant head under here.
Yeah, it's true. But I mean, I wear the hat so infrequently that
it's true.
You know,
it's just size for my small brain.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully we don't embarrass ourselves again today. Although we are answering a question.
I think we do actually have an answer to this one, though.
Well, maybe in a first. Who knows? But I think before we move on to that, I would just like to thank our very active Discord users. Putting in potentially a weird cut here because
that was very
Sean
odd.
lives in the middle of nowhere, and
I've got faster internet than you. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but it's probably held together by country bumpkins.
Spitting prayers, actually.
It's even worse.
So we had a strange Zencaster cock up there. Not quite sure what's going to be salvaged from the first recording, but a big thank you to our Discord server who, in the wake of the egregious feedback suggesting that we weren't perhaps the most tightly edited of podcasts, rode to our rescue to say that's fine.
Preferable, even.
Yeah, I liked that. I liked the suggestion that if you can't be perfect, being noticeably shambolic is better.
I really like the way that you've put that, actually. I don't compliment you very often, but that was nice.
No, don't do it again. It's uncomfortable.
That's weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
I might try it more throughout this episode. See how
just be really off-putting. Please don't.
Yeah. Your voice sounds great today.
That one I do believe, though.
Fuck. That didn't last long then. Okay. Moving swiftly on. Thanks for the feedback. And of course, positive feedback has resulted in our first ever weird crash during a recording. So great.
Yeah, cheers.
So let's just move to today's question.
That's completely thrown off our vibe, hasn't it? What was
it really has, yeah. I mean, I'm kind of lost here to the point where I just spotted a glaring mistake in this document.
What was today's question? Today, we're asking a question that has plagued discussion fora of the Warhammer 40k, and forgive me, universe for aeons, hasn't it?
It really has, and I feel that you're best placed to answer it, so I will ask you. Are there wolves on Fenris?
No.
Well, thanks for listening, everyone. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Wouldn't that be great? Just a quick little 5-minute episode.
That would be so good. That would be really nice. I'd have so much more time in my life. If our
you're not getting away that easily, unfortunately. No. So there are no wolves on Fenris.
Well, it's a difficult question. Actually, it's
because no one cares about Fenris or space wolves. Well, yes, I agree.
Partly that. If we can try really hard to park your latent space Viking racism. If you do you want to get it all out now, and then we can just
Honestly, it would
take
take
it.
longer than an hour.
Can we just take it as read that at every couple of moments you just made some snide comment about for Space Wolves, so we can move on and actually discuss the episode?
I mean, they're an insult to both wolves, of which I'm a big fan, and space, of which I'm a big fan. Not sure how that works, but it's just facts.
How are they an insult to space? I'm not a huge Space Wolf fan. I'm actually basically hijacking this question to be able to have a completely different conversation that I wouldn't have been able to get through our very tough vetting process for deciding episodes.
Yeah. I mean, just to put this into context, because I guess a lot of people may not actually realize this, but the username I tend to go by that I've shortened to Vib for the purpose of this podcast is actually Vibrio Wolf. And if you were to ask me why, I honestly couldn't tell you the answer, because it was one of those things that's 20 plus years old now, I guess. But inherently, I like wolves. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I think my issue with Space Wolves was that I didn't know they existed until I started collecting Dark Angels, and then of course you can't switch, right?
Fair, no, that's
heresy of the
true.
highest order, and the Dark Angels aren't heretics, so I was kind of stuck.
It's odd to slip that little statement in.
Well, we're just so fervent. We always feel the need to say it and stress it and take out anyone who disagrees. I mean, what?
Makes sense. So, but we perhaps need to take a step back, because in our Discord, before recording this episode, somewhat to your surprise, I believe, put out a message suggesting that even people who don't really feel much of a kinship with Warhammer 40k should listen to this episode, because although on the face of it, it looks like we're going to be going really noodly into genetics or what have you. Actually, we're going to be having a much more meta discussion about society and what have you.
Oh, good. You're jumping right.
I'm going full. Well, no, the point that I was about to make is we've got to get there. We've got to help people understand the context in which we're having this discussion. So that obviously necessitates a big, in-depth discussion, probably for the rest of this hour, about who the Space Wolves are, where they come from, their most notable victories, all of this sort of thing. And then next time, obviously in part 2 of this episode, we can actually answer the question.
Oh, this works out great, because I've actually got a lot of work to do. So if you can just monologue for an hour, then that would be fantastic.
Excellent. No, no. Even my arrogance won't stretch that far. But I think it is.
This has got hot take vibes all over it. I'm just putting that out there. Are you springing a hot take on me? What the hell?
No, that's next week.
Oh no!
It's so much. It's so much hotter than this nonsense. I think very quickly though, obviously, Space Wolves are. I say obviously, the Space Wolves are a Viking stroke werewolf themed group of Space Marines, so super soldiers, essentially. And there is an argument to be made that they might take the wolf motif a little bit too far. You have, for example, wolf lords swinging wolf axes, riding giant wolves, or on a chariot being pulled by giant wolves. While
but you know what? I agree with you, but I feel that's that's a more recent development in 40k, that the Space Wolves have become such caricatures. They used to be nowhere near as ridiculous.
It has, I think, got worse. I think that's definitely true, but it's almost symptomatic of 40k as a whole that everything has just become a little bit more ridiculous. But I think if we go into the fiction for a while, there is a line that appears in some of the literature. That's a very advanced term for pulpy space novels.
The Black Library are listening. Ooh, literature, you say?
Which is essentially, there are no wolves on Fenris. Now, Fenris is the planet from which the Space Wolves come. One wonders really, if it's called Fenris, how there can be no wolves on it, especially when on the tabletop you can take wolves, like actual wolves. You can have space marines riding them. So what gives? Why
Yeah, bearing in
is
mind that I don't think there's any other like wolf model in 40k, or maybe orcs have something along those lines.
no
I'm not
no
quite
in
sure, but
40k the only wolf model is the Thunderwolf cavalry,
yeah,
I believe, or Logan
which is so unique
Grimnar's
to the
wolf.
Space Wolves as
Yeah.
well in the Imperium of Man. It's very odd.
Mm. And it's particularly odd given this line. There are no wolves on Fenris. So I guess what gives?
What
Like,
gives? Yes, I
what
mean,
gives?
I was hoping you had the answer.
I realised I was asking a question I'm equipped to answer. So there's a few theories that float around. And my personal favourite, obviously, one is that the Space Wolves are fucking with everyone, which is a good laugh. But my personal favourite is actually leads us into what I sort of more wanted to talk about today. And that's the idea that Fenris, this sort of icy death world populated by megafauna, is a theme park gone wrong. Have you heard this theory?
I have heard this theory. That was a long time ago, though, that I've heard that.
So to understand this theory, we actually need to go back through the timeline a very long way to the height of humanity in sort of the 21st millennium, I think. This is a time period called the Dark Age of technology, when essentially humanity becomes the ascendant or preeminent species in the galaxy. Their technology surpasses all other races at the time, and they are essentially masters of
Well,
the
according to
galaxy,
humanity.
according to humanity. So obviously, it all needs to be taken with a pinch of salt. But we know, for example, that they were capable of intense levels of terraforming, intense levels of genetic manipulation, intense levels of AI creation, which ultimately becomes their downfall, and all of this. But the theory goes that Fenris was essentially a world created during the Dark Age of technology to be a fake Viking planet. So everything is deliberately taken to extremes. The weather is insane. The flora and fauna make no sense. It has no real reason to exist. Even the people are sort of genetically altered from baseline human. And so the
Sure.
theory goes that what you see on Fenris as a quote unquote wolf is actually something completely different, some sort of genetically modified creature that looks like a wolf but is not native to Fenris. It was put there by humanity, and it is not a wolf. It bears no genetic ties to the Terran, the Earth wolf,
Which we have to assume is long died out
which
in
we have to
20,000.
assume is also long died out. Given that I think even then Terra was an ecumenopolis.
You struggled with that word, didn't you?
That's a really hard word.
Nice try.
I've only
Um,
ever seen it written down.
there's a few issues I've got with that
Mm.
theory. The first being, yeah, fine, they introduced some kind of lupine creature, but why or how, and is it the same as the Thunderwolves that they then now ride as Space Marines? Presumably it's the same sort of tech that they used to make those wolves as they used to make Space Marines, something along those lines. And the other one is, if they went for a Viking world, why focus on wolves? That's not the first thing most people think of when you think Viking, is it?
No, that's very true. And I guess to answer that question, we almost need to look at the space wolves themselves, because the process of creating a space wolf or a space marine, so any of the various legions of the the Great Crusade involves implanting several new organs, changing their basic DNA to turn them into these superhuman warriors. Now, the Space Wolves receive a unique whatever it is, whether it's given to them, I think it's a drink, something called the Canis Helix, which is what causes their teeth to grow very long and them to start sort of growing extra hair and all of that. So another theory, which sort of sits alongside the theme park gone wrong idea, is that the wolves on Fenris are genetically modified humans, where the genetic modification essentially went too far. And there's some parts of the books, the Black Library books, that actually support this theory. So particularly the idea that they're space wolf aspirants for whom, for whatever reason, the full process didn't take. So in some legions, they would just be taken out back and shot in the head. But the Space Wolves, essentially, they degenerate down into these massive lupine creatures and are sort of let out to roam the world.
That's a much worse theory.
Less strong or more horrifying?
Nah, just much more ridiculous. That makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, I know that all that gene tech is, of course, fictional. I'm required to say that under by law. But come on, really? That's where we're going with this? It goes so badly wrong that they turn into giant space wolves. No, that's stupid.
Well,
That's really stupid.
Well, they do actually turn into space wolves if it goes right, but I suspect that's not what you meant.
As you well know, yes.
Sorry, couldn't resist. We do know that a natural byproduct of the process is that some space wolves essentially turn into werewolves. So this is where the Wolfen come in. That's a space wolf who, for whom the sort of transformations go too far, and they lose control of themselves, and they grow so much hair they genuinely look like the Wolfman from sort of a Hammer film.
Sure, but with those, well, okay, so maybe I'll have to recant my own argument a little.
So I think the argument goes that what the sort of thunderwolves that you see are just a wolfen that keeps going.
Maybe. I did momentarily forget that the warp is a thing in 40k.
Also, the warp is a thing.
Because, we have other instances of Space Marine Legionnaires going a little far with their transformations. Not looking at any vampires directly, but...
very wise.
It happens.
It's a fair point.
Because, of course, we have to remember that, the Empire... the Empire of Mankind, the Emperor of Mankind, or as I like to believe, the Empress of Mankind.
That's a good. I like that theory.
Fucks with the, they fuck with the warp a fair bit to do whatever it is they do, and I'm still kind of unclear as to whatever it is they do. But that could well explain, genetic experimentation gone a bit wrong.
Yeah. I think that's it.
So I don't hate that.
A very big part of it. Now there are some facets of this that are quite confusing. So I think actually the second theory, given everything else that we know, probably carries more weight in terms specifically as to where the wolves on Fenris come from. And the reason I think that
can we just before you go on, can we just point out therefore that you've answered the question wrong at the very start? Because you categorically answered no, there are no wolves on Fenris, when you're now explaining why there are wolves on Fenris.
No, I'm explaining that what you see on Fenris that looks like a wolf isn't a wolf.
Oh, I mean...
And then we can have an argument about semantics, if you like.
Yeah, where's your degree in zoology, huh?
I think the argument would be that their taxonomy is closer to Homo sapien than it is Lupus lupus.
Okay, we're going to start talking about what a werewolf is now, huh? More man or more wolf?
Man.
Yeah, I probably do agree with that, unfortunately.
Next stupid question, please.
Fine. Yeah, okay, fine. So there were no wolves. Well, in the theme park gone wrong idea, I suppose there may have been.
The point is that the theory starts to fall apart when you consider the idea, the theme park gone wrong idea on its own starts to fall apart when you consider the scattering of the Primarchs, which I don't really want to get into, but the coincidence of Leman Russ ending up on Fenris, if we know that the
Sure.
the Primarchs were scattered across all the myriad worlds of the galaxy, it's just a bit hard to stomach.
Well, but again, something warp fuckery, right?
Sure. But
no, I agree. It does seem more obvious, considering that it's his genetic sort of blueprint that's used to make the Space Wolves, and
he himself carries a
character.
He himself carries a lot of lupine characteristics.
Shit in a fist fight.
Yeah, if you turn your back on someone.
Well, who the fuck does that?
A guy who's realised the stupidity of the fight that he's having.
What a moron. Anyway, no, I've got a lot of time for Leman Russ. But there are no wolves on Fenris. You are correct. Space Wolf genetics is the explanation.
Probably the explanation, I think. But
GW really have caricatured it a little bit too much, because they just stand out, I think, compared to other Space Marine legions as being a little bit too far, in their own lore. If that's a way of putting it, but you know what I mean.
They do. I think there's an out of world explanation for that, which is that they're the best sellers, so that's why they get all the fancy models.
Possible. Are they actually? Do you know that for a fact?
No, I don't know that.
It wouldn't surprise me.
It wouldn't surprise me if they're definitely up there, specifically in terms of Space Marines. I wouldn't be surprised to discover that they or generic are the best sellers.
Yeah.
Or Smurfs. That's true, actually. Smurfs. But Smurfs have a lot of Ultramarines for the uninitiated. They're called Smurfs because they're very blue. Ultramarine.
So blue.
Even.
Yeah, funnily enough.
But that's such a stupid name for a legion as well. We're all Space Marines, but we're the Ultramarines. Fuck
yeah,
off.
Exactly. We are more Marine than any other Marine. Yeah.
Hoorah.
You know they're the Americans in the Space Marine world.
They are quite, aren't they?
Not to upset any American listeners.
Sorry.
But,
Oh, that's thrown me. Where was I going with that?
I know. All I've done so far this episode, I feel, is derail you, and I'm absolutely loving it.
That's very, very impressive, because we agreed at the start that this was going to be sort of me talking and you asking questions, and all of your questions have completely derailed me.
Especially because very early on you said that the whole topic was going to be much more poignant and bigger picture than this, and wasn't really supposed to speak purely to the Warhammer purists, and all we've done is talk about Warhammer purism.
So that's only 20 minutes. There's 40 minutes to go.
Well, you don't know how much more I'm going to derail you.
Thank you for reminding me that this was a jumping off point to zoom out and talk about the game at large.
Well, I'm nothing if not good at what I do.
So you're nothing.
Hey!
He's done it.
Okay, someone edit that out, please.
Pushing at an open door. That's not the right use of that idiom. God,
you idiot! Honestly,
I'm so
right. I'm gonna let you make your point. Why is the discussion that started with such a bizarre question actually relevant to anyone's life?
So the point is that asking whether or not the wolves on Fenris are actually wolves or not is the wrong question, because the whole idea of there are no wolves on Fenris is to make us think about essentially the decline of the Imperium and Fenris as a facsimile or a stand-in for the Imperium at large. And actually, what you've been saying about the Space Wolves becoming more and more idiosyncratic and ridiculous further plays into this idea that they had a vague motif. The Space Wolves of the Horus Heresy are completely different from the Space Wolves of the quote-unquote modern canon. So you can see the decline even in there, and that's within the Imperium. But if you look at the Imperium versus what they had before, the whole point of the Imperium is this backwards negative stagnation, I think.
Sure.
But not only
So
that,
by that I mean, because they were in an age of unsurpassed technology, but you very specifically called it the dark age of technology.
that's how it's described in the modern
Yeah.
canon. I'm just going to say modern. Obviously, this is all sort of
Fiction.
now in universe fiction, but in the modern Imperium, the dark age of technology is looked upon as some great heyday, but also with a huge amount of fear and revulsion, even. And you look at the techno adepts of the Imperium, and it's a religion. They've completely
Yeah.
lost any sense of innovation, creativity, even understanding of what it is that they're doing in favor of religious dogma,
Yeah. Yeah.
basically. I mean,
Praying to the machine spirit.
exactly. They pray to the machines. They have no AI whatsoever. They have no thinking machines. All of their technology is run by human brains trapped in robots. Everything is run by cyborgs, basically,
Yeah.
because they
Pretty much.
can't have self-functioning robots because they don't understand them and are afraid of them. But it borders on the ridiculous, right? They have the right of percussive maintenance for malfunctioning technology, which is where they hit it. But they have to cover it in sacred oils and chant hymns to it before slapping a computer screen on the side to make it work. People, I fear, don't understand this point, that the whole setting is parody. And
Yeah.
what's the most obvious example of that you and I have both seen recently?
Yes, I believe you're referring to a particular Reddit post, are you not?
I am.
Yeah, that was a good one. I mean,
There's a gentleman on Reddit.
yeah. I feel we should maybe try to link the post, although that's perhaps pushing it a little far.
I don't want to link it because I don't. The fact that this person didn't understand it isn't a cause for scorn. Well, it is. Sorry, it absolutely is. But it's not cause for a pile on of our
It's
16 listeners.
but it's yeah, true. But it so accurately emphasized the extent of the misconception, the misunderstanding of
Exactly.
the Warhammer 40k universe. Even though Games Workshop themselves have tried to make it abundantly clear. I mean, to put this in reference, the sign of the Imperium, the Imperial Aquila, is just a double-headed eagle.
It is.
Right, which is a sign that we're all familiar with, which is what sparked this debate on Reddit about a particular gentleman who wanted to get the Imperial Aquila tattooed on himself. And his friends were apparently saying it's a little reminiscent of the Nazis.
Yes.
And he just couldn't understand why, even though it is more or less the exact same symbol.
So to be completely fair, the Nazi eagle only has one head.
Yes.
The Imperial Eagle of Germany has two heads.
Yeah, fine.
But
Sure.
but it
When you think of the death corpse of Krieg, you know,
it's
with their
absolutely
Imperial Aquila,
ridiculous.
it's just
They're fascist.
it's fascist
It's
symbology on a
just
fascist nation.
fascism symbology plastered all over the Imperium. The Imperium is a death cult. It is a totalitarian, fascist, theocratic bureaucracy. Essentially, why would you want a symbol of that tattooed on your skin? I don't understand it. And the only thing that I can come back to is that people have missed the point of the setting, which is parody.
But you're absolutely right. But what really gets me is, right, the slogan for 40k is, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Right?
Exactly.
They write it on the fucking label. It's grim dark. It's horrible. There's only war. There are no good guys when everything is just war.
What's the phrase? To be a man in such times is... I found it here. I found the whole thing. It is the 41st millennium. For more than 100 centuries, the Emperor has sat immobile on the golden throne of terror. Now that sounds pretty epic, right? That's almost Dune-esque. Frank Herbert could have written that. He is the master of mankind by the will of the gods, and master of 1,000,000 worlds by the might of his inexhaustible armies. Starting to slip. He is a rotting carcass writhing invisibly with power from the dark age of technology. That's not great. He is the carrion lord of the Imperium, for whom 1,000 souls are sacrificed every day, so that he may never truly die. And then there's a whole bit about the various factions. And then, sorry, just the last paragraph. To be a man in such times is to be one amongst untold billions. It is to live in the cruelest and most bloody regime imaginable. That's it.
Yeah. And so just to put that into context, because of course this is an Imperium that routinely just destroys its own planets, for reasons. But so therefore, just to keep the Emperor alive, 1,000 souls a day for 10,000 years.
We've done the numbers, and it's actually not that many.
It's 3.7 billion people.
So half the population of Earth. All right, it's quite a lot of people.
for one man, let's not forget. To keep one man not even alive, to keep one man in a sort of bizarre stasis mode. And yes, the logic is that he apparently keeps everything at bay. But let's be real.
But this comes back to the whole issue with the setting. They don't know why that works.
Yeah.
There's no one sitting on Earth going, well, he needs X number of souls because the drain on his soul is such that blah, 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 blah. So we could build a machine that would maybe help alleviate that. No, there's none of that. It worked once, so they just keep doing it.
Yeah. And all that to maintain a status quo where I would estimate 99% of humans alive in the 40k universe have got a shit life. Like, unimaginably shit.
This
not only is it bad enough they have to live in some sort of hive world and live off recycled corpses as food, but then, the Imperial Legion shows up and sends you just to your death.
Yeah.
with the sole purpose of being like, oh, you're the meat shield. It's why
the Imperial Guard, the Astra Militarum, as it's now called, is deliberately designed to be ineffective.
It's just designed to be enough of a barrier for the Space Marines to show up.
That's not quite fair. You do see victories from the Astra Militarum.
They do.
But the whole point is it's designed to be ineffective such that it requires support. So all of the regiments on their own are inefficient and ineffective. It only works through combined... It's essentially a modern military, so it works on the basis of combined arms. But
ultimately, it's the... I guess it's not called the Air Force.
The Navy.
It's the Navy, that's the one. That ultimately wins everything for the regular Imperial Guard.
It's a regime that's designed to self-propagate and no more, essentially. And as the intro blurb to the core rulebook says, this is the bloodiest regime imaginable, cruelest and most bloody regime imaginable.
Yes.
In the grim dark
Yeah.
future, there is only one. It's in the setting. It's grim dark.
It's awful. It's a terrible regime. It's fascist. They will literally just wipe out any non-human race because they're not human.
Or humans who disagree with them.
Or humans who disagree with them. Or war-possessed demons who may just be out there looking for a good time. So, you know, the idea of someone wanting to rep that kind of regime is bizarre. And I mean, you know, let's not forget it is ultimately a game, right? We often fake argue about dark angels are better than blood angels.
They're both
But deep
awful.
down we know that they're both awful.
Yeah.
That's the whole point.
It's like there was a really interesting conversation I saw a couple of days ago about who was morally the best and worst Primarchs.
Yeah.
They're all genocidal maniacs.
Yeah.
To be completely clear, in the what are we in now? The 21st century. Any one of them, well, we wouldn't be able to, but would be put on trial and shot for war crimes. Like instantly.
That would actually be a fun exercise to do. Like, what would we do if Primarch showed up on Earth now?
Nuke them.
Yeah, probably. That might not even be enough.
Probably, unless it's Vulcan or Magnus, you're probably safe.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be Vulcan, isn't it?
Yeah. But people are, oh, Vulcan's probably the nicest Primarch. And that's true. Like, he is the nicest genocidal, homicidal maniac.
And that's the thing, the common denominator across every 40k character is that they're just bloodthirsty maniacs out to kill whatever they encounter.
Yeah.
They're all Tyranids at heart.
Well, I was going to say, so we've done the Imperium, and I'm sure we'll come back to them, but they're the only guys, right? There are some good guys out there, surely. I mean, Chaos, I suppose, not, because they're the ones who'll flay you and wear your skin.
It's a matter of perspective, really.
Assuming I'm the person whose skin is being worn.
Yeah, but we just don't understand the warp. You know, maybe that is the real truth. And, you know, we're just too blind to see it.
But any god who requires that a book be made of my skin in order to write their holy text on is an evil god, to be clear.
No, they just haven't developed paper tech yet. No,
they
of course, Chaos.
Book. They're transcribing the paper book onto my skin.
Yeah. But what's really funny about Chaos in 40k is that the biggest Chaos enemies you encounter are just Chaos Space Marines, really. Yeah, there are demons, of course, don't get me wrong, but
it's mostly just our very best soldiers, but spiky.
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much.
Which is pretty great.
So that's great. So they're not great. I mean, I mentioned the Tyranids, and it's a bit abstract for them, I guess, because they're not really evil, and they're certainly not good. They're just a hive mind whose sole purpose is to propagate itself, and so they eat everything they find.
These are essentially the bugs from Starship Troopers, aren't they?
Pretty much, yeah. And they don't kill you because they hate you. They kill you because you're food.
Yeah,
I assume.
They might anyway. Well, I think you do actually see in, you're going to hate this, but in one of the Blood Angels books, Mephiston like psychically connects with the hive mind because he's special, and discovers that the hive mind does actually hate. It doesn't.
Sure. Or he's just really high and deluded and doesn't know what he's talking about.
He could be really high and deluded. It's definitely possible.
But no, yeah, I guess it is entirely possible that the hive mind has some form of hatred for everything else. Sure.
It's sort of, if you're the guy being eaten, the thing eating you looks like a bad guy.
Yeah,
we can argue they're not good. They might be a natural force, but they're not good.
Well, this is Lara Wraith good all over again.
Yeah, and you're never going to convince me otherwise.
Just because the Nids have a particular dietary requirement doesn't make them the bad guys.
Their
The
particular
fact that they
dietary
have talents for
requirement.
arms might make them the bad guy.
Their particular dietary requirement is all biomass in the galaxy.
Exactly.
The
Well, they're
other,
nothing if not efficient, like,
yeah.
they take everything.
The
Because I guess the other argument, or the other race that kind of fits the bill in terms of that argument, is probably the orcs, right? It's just a fungus that does weird shit when it matures.
It's true, but again, they're shown to rip people's arms off and find it amusing.
Absolutely,
So
yeah, but they do that to themselves as well. The orcs are one of the, if you don't get in their way, you might be fine.
I think the problem with that is that the nature of orcness is that eventually you're in their way.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but ultimately the Imperium, in their quest to colonize literally everything, brought that on themselves.
Well, there's a theory that that's not quite right. So the Great Crusade, again, come back to the Imperium are not the good guys. One of the height, they're at their absolute height. They waged a bloody war across the stars, and they called it a crusade. Like, look up the Crusades, guys. They weren't good.
They weren't. Also, have you just swallowed a book of quotes on 40k?
No,
Yeah, okay. I love that hesitation.
I don't know where that's come from.
You remember that I'm editing this one, right?
I don't understand.
That pause is going to be very long.
I don't understand your point.
No, I'm quite enjoying it. You actually sound not totally moronic for a change.
I did swallow a Thethoreth recently.
So are there any good guys in 40k?
So the one that obviously I hear spoken about a lot is the Tau.
Dark Eldar.
The what now?
The Dark Eldar, of course. No?
The sadistic elves.
Yeah, I suppose they are called dark, aren't they?
The sadistic space elves that survive by offering the flayed souls of...
By torturing, yes. Yeah, okay, sorry, I'm thinking of the wrong ones. Harlequins?
They're an interesting one, actually. I think they just exist to put on plays. Don't quite know.
Well, they guard a library, so they're good guys in my books, to be honest.
True.
See what I did there with that pun as well. Yes, to the Tau. Yes.
So, I guess Quinn's maybe to a lesser extent, but I don't really think of them as a full faction.
Yeah,
fair point.
No, the Tau. You're right. That's the one I think that gets talked about most as quote unquote the good guys.
Yeah, because their battle cry is for the greater good, and obviously because everything can just be taken at surface level, a faction that exists to further the greater good must be the good guys.
Yeah.
Right?
And I guess they have the rather unusual setup in the 40k world that they do have multiple species represented in their faction.
Yeah.
Although that is also inherently the problem.
It's not the only problem, but it's certainly a problem. It's not the specific problem I have. The specific problem I have is that it's a fucking caste system. Like, more strict and more abhorrent than any that exists or has existed on Earth in our history. There's a significant suggestion that that most of the Tau are kept in line by psychic control. Like, it's a horrible regime. All right,
it's great.
It might work. It might be effective, but the idea that the Tau are the good guys is, again, it's so surface level.
It's just the whole world under the Imperius curse. It's just great.
Well, again, it works.
It's taking the term technocracy to a different level, really, isn't it?
Yeah. I think,
But yeah, so that is problematic. And they don't treat the alien species that they supposedly are allied with particularly well either. Because
no,
I was the lowest possible cast.
I was going to ask you what you saw as the problem with the Auxilia, but that's essentially it, I suppose.
Yeah, but insofar that at least they do that.
At least they don't kill them.
Well, but they
All
kind
the
of do,
time.
right? Because they just get because specifically the one you find on tabletop, which are the Kroot, which are like the only close quarters combat troops the Tau faction has.
I do
But they
like.
get sent in to be the meat shields while they just blast everything to pieces with their railguns. Ultimately, so
Yeah, I do like that the Tau are the ones closest to like a modern military because they just stand as far away as possible and shoot with the greatest amount of firepower possible.
it is, yeah. It is astonishing. We've briefly touched on this, I believe, in the past, right? In terms of what's the whole point of actually having a sword in the 40k universe, but we'll park that for another time.
It makes sense if you're a space marine. It doesn't make sense if you're like an imperial guardsman.
Yeah, but I mean, the Tau, I guess, are they are possibly in their age of technology, and probably the sort of
Yes, they're. I think
species that is perhaps set to become dominant in the universe, and then obviously fall, because that seems to be what happens.
because
I mean, it happened to the
this
Necrons first, then it happened to the Eldar, then it happened to mankind.
because this is a universe where with antagonists. I suppose that's the answer.
Yeah, yeah. The Necrons, I guess, are perhaps an interesting one. And my lore is very weak.
My lore is very
as,
outdated.
as if to imply that my lore is ever any good. Um,
The thing is that
yeah, but they used to just be a technologically advanced race, and it's unclear if they were inherently abhorrent or not. But they were embroiled in a very big war, and shit happened.
yeah, it's very difficult to understand.
And now they hate everything that lives. So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
is a problem.
It's not ideal if you're vying for best guy in the 40k universe, really.
Not massively, no. So not the Necrons, not the Orcs, not the Nids, not the Tau, not anything of mankind. The Eldar, in that case, the actual non-dark ones.
They're not great
They're not good,
though,
really, are they?
but I suppose they might. Craftworld Eldar might be your best bet, actually. Although the problem with the entire setting is the rampant xenophobia.
Yes.
So I think there's a quote from one of the Eldar high ups that is essentially, I would let 1,000,000 worlds of man burn to save one Eldar life.
Yes.
So
And that really is the theme of Warhammer 40,000, really, isn't it?
that's the issue. That's
Which
the
is where
issue.
it's distinct from Warhammer Fantasy for sure, because there was a little more cooperation in that world.
Yes,
I can't speak for Age of Sigmar because I really don't know it.
I think you've got a sense in Age of Sigmar that at any given moment, anyone can work with anyone against anyone,
Yeah, I think
with
that's
the
right.
possible exception of Archaon. But like, you've got these grand alliances, so they can sort of any grand alliance can work with any other one against any other one. I think. Like
Yeah,
I'm sure Nagash works with Sigmar a lot and stuff like that, even though they're sort of antagonistic towards each other.
yeah. I mean, the fantasy setting is a little more Tolkienish in terms of that there is probably something that you could define as bad and something you could define as a force for good.
Yes,
Well, yeah, maybe not so much a force for good, but just less bad.
there's the guy who wants to end the world,
Yes, and then there's
Archaon,
everyone else.
and then there's everyone else who wants to argue about what sort of world they should live in.
Yeah, and then there's rumors of ratmen, I guess.
Yeah, but let's not
But
pay those any credence.
yeah, I know. You give fans an arm and they'll just take a leg by coming up with stupid things, right? It's just crazy. ultimately. I mean, you think if there's ever going to be Ratman, it'll be in 40k, right?
It's absolutely crying out for Ratman in 40k. I love that they've brought dwarves to 40k. That's
yeah.
so random. So yeah, there's dwarves now.
But it makes sense in the 40k universe, right? Because you just introduce a new sector that's full of
Yeah,
what you want it to be full of.
exactly.
Uh,
Leagues of Votan. They've got good names.
they do.
They've got good names.
So yeah, I think we can both agree for once that there are no good guys in 40k, and that getting any kind of 40k tattoo is arguably sending the wrong message.
I think it's, you have to be so careful, right? So if you wanted to get, I'm going to pick something around like a quote from a Dan Abnett book or something, because there was something in that was really resonant with you, or
Yeah, well, I guess what we have to say as well is that if you look at the most basic level of the lore, everyone's a bad guy. But equally, you can read a book like the Eisenhorn series,
yes,
and you do see that there is still humanity in the Imperium of Mankind. Not all people are complete assholes.
no, but
That's not the case.
no, but that's absolutely true. But the world in which you're working is so much less forgiving. So
Yeah,
there's a really good Eisenhorn short actually, where he's investigating a series of murders in a hive city. You must know this one, and he discovers actually that the murders are being done by Imperial Guard
yeah,
veterans
yeah,
who've basically been abandoned. So there's a point there about, in our world, the way that we treat veteran soldiers, and I think, it's Dan Abnett making the point with a sledgehammer. But that's what 40k does. It's not subtle.
it's also what Dan Abnett does.
It's also what Dan Abnett does. But then Eisenhorn kills all of them
Yeah,
rather than
not
attempt,
on his own mind, but yes,
not on his own, but his sort of attempt to bring them in quietly, as it were, is so light.
it is overwhelmingly the way any inquisitorial investigation ends, right? With deaths.
He
And
basically
even in the
goes,
cases where the Inquisitor doesn't kill whoever it is they're investigating, very often something very bad will happen to those people anyway. So
yeah, he basically goes, guys, it's fine. The war is over. You can put down your guns. And they go, but what if you're lying to us? And then he shoots one of them. Like, there's no. It's a setting completely devoid of compassion. Other
yeah, I
than
mean, the Inquisitors themselves and perhaps not the ones to look
they're
for. You know.
they're not. But one, we have the problem that the Inquisitors are the ones in whose eyes we've been a lot, because they
Yeah,
make for very good stories. But also, Eisenhorn is, as he himself says in one of the Dan Abnett books, his authority is unlimited.
yeah,
Um, but he could have brought in specialist hostage negotiators or psychiatrists or therapists or whatever. But one, I'm fairly sure none of those fucking exist in 40k. And two, he doesn't. He goes immediately to, and he is, in the grand scheme of things, one of the good guys of the Imperium. And he's like, just shoot him. It's a shame. I feel bad about it for like a day. Oh well, I'm over it. Time to go summon some
yeah,
demons.
exactly. And that is them shooting like an individual when they also just don't really have any qualms about bombing an entire planet.
Yeah.
And killing alien races that are probably unique in the universe. So yeah, not the good guys, but I guess there's something, because you can be a fan of the setting and realize that all the things that we've said are true and apply,
Well,
and still enjoy it, because we both enjoy the
yeah,
universe, because we're sober enough to see it.
we're
And I
like,
could feasibly see someone saying, as you said, you could maybe tattoo a quote or something that resonates with you. You could have some sort of Necron symbol on you because it looks cool, and then you can just say, oh yeah, it's from this tabletop game, and they're not good guys, etc.
I think the point is exactly as you're making. Recognize the points that 40k, the parody points or the satire points that 40k is
Yeah,
making. The thing that really struck me about the Reddit post that actually inspired this episode was that the guy who had been consuming this media for 10, 15, 20 years completely did not understand the parody or the satire that he was being, as I say, hit over the face with
yeah,
again and again and again. So
yeah. Agreed.
yeah.
So then let's link this all the way back, because you, I think, had some grander point on why the question, are there wolves on Fenris, is A, the wrong one, and B, is actually quite important.
Right. So, are there wolves on Fenris? That as a question we joked at the start. It's occupied the fandom for aeons. But it descends into a petty argument. Yes, there are. No, there aren't. Well, it means this. Well, it means that. Whereas my perspective is that the question is getting us to take a step back and try and understand why the people of Fenris want to want to say there are no wolves on Fenris. They're telling us the setting is deeper. They're telling us to look through the veil, look beyond the flashy lights, the sparkly colours, and to really interrogate the setting, the people in it, the stories. It's the closest thing you can get, I think, to the author of the book hitting, like coming round to your house and saying, there's an extra meaning here, you've got to
Yeah,
read more carefully, this isn't just, well, it is just pulpy literature, but at the same time pulp can have a point, pulp can have a message.
it's the Tom Bombadil of the 40k universe.
It is sort of the Tom Bombadil of the 40k universe in a really confusing way.
As is Tom Bombadil's wont, isn't it?
Yes, but if you come away from Prospero Burns and your reaction to there are no wolves on Fenris is to say, huh, that's an odd thing for someone to say. I wonder what that means. And then you start to think about the book and think about, well, if they're not wolves, what are they? Then that's great. You've understood it. But if you go even further and you go, symbolically, if the wolves aren't wolves, does that mean that the good guys aren't good guys?
Yeah,
Then you've I think gone as far as you need to.
yeah. I think that's once again quite nicely phrased.
Sorry, I had to mute there because I just really like burp to completely
Nice.
ruin my profundity.
Okay, well, there you go. So one thing that I wanted to briefly touch on, I guess, before we wrap up then.
Sure.
So we've had the dark age of technology, long gone. We now have an Imperium that is really, really rotten to the core. It's a mess. They're obviously fascists. It's horrid.
Yeah.
And I guess the Horus Heresy is perhaps so popular because that genuinely you could kind of break that down into a good versus bad, because you had the evil Chaos Space Marines trying to kill all the humans, and people naturally get on board with that sort of thing.
But also, very quickly, if I may, the benefit of the Horus Heresy is that you can see the Imperium balanced on a knife edge.
Yes.
It could fall in, and it's so tragic because it could fall into the Imperium that we know is coming because we know 40k, or it could fall the other way into this sort of glorious second dark age of technology, height of humanity. Now, obviously, that's at the expense of every other sapient race in the galaxy, but them's the breaks.
Exactly. And so here is my question to you then. Do you think the return of the Primarchs will see the Imperium move to a more measured way of behaving, or will it actually pronounce its fascism?
What do I think? I think that it's so dependent on which Primarchs they bring back.
And
Bringing
will it
back,
cause a civil war? I guess
it may cause a civil war. Bringing back Guilliman, I think, although I make jokes about it, was actually a really good idea, because Guilliman gives you the closest thing to like an actually good guy in terms of statesmanship.
Yeah.
Right? He comes back to the Imperium, and if you read the Dark Imperium trilogy, he basically goes, "What the fuck did you guys do?" He hates the ceremony, the religiosity of the whole thing. Now, granted, he's still a genocidal maniac, but he's one of the less bad ones.
And also much less of a xenophobe.
Much less of a xenophobe. Some might even call him a xenophile.
Yeah, if certain texts are to be believed. I say texts.
But I think that bringing the Primarchs back gives Games Workshop the opportunity to move away from the parody to an extent and start to try and make
It's
elements of the Imperium that are a little bit less bad.
But it's essentially just doing it the same way that the Horus Heresy did it, right? Because had they
Here's
just
some
introduced
actual
Guilliman
good guys.
or quote unquote good Primarchs, Imperial Primarchs, that's one thing. But because they're introducing Primarchs that fell to chaos as well, you just get the feeling they're setting up Horus Heresy 2.0, right?
Yeah, they're just drawing battle lines.
Yeah.
But
which is bad news for anyone who collects anything other than Imperium chaos / non-chaos.
yeah,
Because it just means more and more stories about
so many more
spacemen.
Space Marines.
Yeah.
I mean, it even depends which Space Marines you collect. I'm never getting a Primarch model. Yeah, Primarch statue.
Yeah, that is too funny. I will.
Yeah, you will. You'll probably get in the next one. The line at the Khan, I reckon, at the next one.
Or Lehman Russ, there's this talk of Lehman Russ.
I don't think they'll do Russ. I think they'll do the Lion. Because Russ doesn't create a conflict. Because Russ will just slot in as Guilliman's Bessie-May. The Lion would create a conflict.
Yeah, and the thing is, once you introduce Lehman Russ, he's going to just go mental. And I think that's when you see the Imperium really move on the Eye of Terror or something along those lines.
Yeah.
That's my guess with Russ. He's too wild not to. You can't introduce Lehman or reintroduce Lehman Russ and then just have him politic.
No, but you can with the Lion.
Yeah, he's just a Guilliman with much darker energy in some ways.
Yeah,
not darker maybe, but
just far fewer
pragmatic
qualms.
energy.
Far fewer qualms.
Yeah.
So, I guess in answer to our initial question, are there wolves on Fenris? The answer is stop asking stupid questions.
So on that note, this will be the last show that we ever record. I didn't realize that when we started, but okay, I guess
you've just killed
you've
us.
Unilaterally killed our show.
Just shot the podcast. Oops.
Or we will come back to you next week or in 2 weeks' time with a good question. That doesn't sound right.
I'm reading what our next topic is, so maybe.
Well, I think we shan't keep our listeners in suspense, and at this point, I will just thank everyone for listening to this episode of Expertise is Overrated. No doubt we've said some things that were either objectively wrong or downright offensive. As ever, feel free to let us know, rate the podcast and leave us a comment, or drop us an email at expertiseisoverrated@gmail.com, tweet us at @0expertise, check out our website expertiseisoverrated.podbean.com, or come join us on our Discord server.
If you're lucky, we might just argue with you in one of our upcoming episodes. And if you're really lucky, we might call you an idiot. Now, next time, I will be giving you an absolutely screaming hot take
No,
on Edmure Tully. Much maligned, but, as I will show, true hero of A Song of Ice and Fire. Join us then for more nonsense.